Moles. So we have one type of mole across most of Nebraska. And it's funny because depending on the soil, so you have to know a lot about agronomy and soil science too when you're talking about wildlife. Places like Lancaster County have less mole problems than Washington and Douglas County. Around Grand Island, Hall County, and Buffalo County, near the river, they have more mole problems. But you get out to the sandhills, you have gopher problems. So depending on which part of the state you are, you may have a lot of mole problems, or you may not have a lot of mole problems. But if you go by our hits and the number of questions from master gardeners and landscapers across the state of Nebraska, moles have been designated one of our #1 questions on resolving problems. So, one thing about moles, they're small, they're only about 6 inches, a very, very fine fur, okay? They do have eyes, but they're vestigial, which means they hardly work, but you can find them if you look real closely. They mainly go by tactile, and you can see their nose there on the thing. So right there is that funny-looking nose, and their arms here go backwards, so they swim through the soil, okay? And their teeth are tiny little prongy things because they are related to insectivores. They are an insectivore, okay? So what damage do they cause? Well, as they're swimming through the soil, they're just under the turf layer, okay? And they're ripping the roots. They don't eat the roots. They're just looking for their diet, which is insects and earthworms. And I'll get to how much that is. But the damage they cause is either these mounds, when they're digging deep, which can be pushed down, but what they do is when they upheave the soil, when they're traveling and looking for food, it then, if you don't stamp it back down almost immediately and then water it, those roots dry out and that turf will die in that area, okay? This won't happen to heavy rooted plant material like ivy or in your area where you have gardens. They're just aerating because those roots are too thick. So it's mainly a turf problem, okay? Now some people don't like it because they do make the yard feel mushy. And so that's another, so to speak, nuisance, a problem they can cause. So they do have these burrows. They have what we call runs, which are long burrows. They have the mounds where they go deep, and their nest is usually only about 20 to 24 inches below grade. Nope, there. Okay, their diet, and this is done with several studies, some done here at UNL and at others, but across Nebraska, if we go over the whole year of trapping them and doing stomach contents, 70% plus of their diet is earthworms. Of the 30% that's not earthworms, it is usually insects that are in the soil. But half of that, 15% of their diet, is one type of insect. Who wants to tell me what you think that type of insect is? Not mole crickets. There's not that many mole crickets in Nebraska, or they probably would eat those. I can give you a hint if you know entomology. It's the most common insect in the soil. Not grubs. That's the most commonest answer. Grubs are a very, very small part of their diet. Ants, very good. So you have 70% of their diet in Nebraska is earthworms, and about 15% of their diet is ants, and that last 15% is everything else that's in the insect that's in the soil. If they accidentally take in vegetation, like roots, they can't digest it. It goes in one end and out the other end, like corn with us, okay? They get no value out of it. So they're only after earthworms, and they find earthworms by the static or movement, vibration the earthworms make in the soil, because they have a very heavy tactile, and by the smell. So they're using olfaction, their nose, and the movement of the earthworms. So when they're going like this through the soil, they're looking for earthworms. So if your lawn is very luscious and you water a lot, okay, you have more earthworms. And if your yard is dry and hard and you don't water very much, you don't have earthworms, and you probably won't get moles. So lots of times I get this, I take care of my lawn. I fertilize it, I mow it all the time, and I mulch and I water it, and I have the moles. My neighbor does nothing, and he has no moles. Yep, you answer the question. You make it, they will come, right? Yeah, they can forage 50 to 75 feet in one night. They usually are crepuscular, which means at dawn and dusk, but sometimes they work during the day and overnight. They like the moist, shaded areas under trees. They don't like the hot, dry areas as much. Less earthworms, plus harder soil to dig through. They've been clocked at 80 feet in 1 minute, so they go fast through that. So if you ever chased them and try to hit them with a pitchfork, it's tough. I think I've only done it twice in all my years. And people think because they have all these runs, they have the whole nation of moles in their yard. A male will have a range of 3 acres. And that's usually when it's mating season, coming up in the next couple of weeks. Okay, he'll travel over 3 acres looking for a mate. Females, 2/3 of an acre, that's it. So they're not moving all over the place. So you probably, in a 1 acre lot, you probably only have 2 or 3 moles. They're just moving a lot, okay? Okay, so let's look at how we're gonna, now you learned all about them, we can look at some management. So I'm gonna go through this management on all these taxa or species in a pure IPM method, which is integrated pest management, where we look at things like habitat modification, cultural, and then we'll look at things like, physical changes or exclusion. Then we'll look at things possibly like repellents. And lastly, we'll look at toxicants, okay? That's a true IPM methodology, and we're gonna follow that with everything. Because when it comes to wildlife, we have to follow that IPM methodology, because especially today, someone won't care that much if you kill a dandelion in their yard or if you spray and you kill a lot of insects. But there's so many people, if you just hurt the head of one bunny, they're really upset. So when it comes to vertebrate control, we have to be cognizant of what's going on. And so IPM helps us with that. So, habitat. We know what kind of soil they like. They like moist, rich soil. So if you can have an area that you want a cactus garden, you probably won't have much problem, or if it's harder. If you can go to something that they can't harm, like a ground cover, they'll just aerate underneath that. They won't hurt the roots because they're thick, okay? But if it's a turf, whether it's fescue or bluegrass or bentgrass, they will rip the roots, no matter how long those roots are. And so that's more liable. Some people say, well, let's put a rock barrier around. Well, you have to make that rock barrier go probably close to 1.5 to 2 foot down and make it pretty solid for them not to dig through it with their paws, okay? And you probably should make it pretty wide. It's not really feasible. A fence barrier, well, you can do that. You have to come up above the ground about 8 inches and go down in the ground about 2 foot. I don't think that's feasible, but it's possible, okay? Reduction of food supply. Everybody thinks, oh, and again, this has been propagated by people who make money on this, is that we get rid of the grubs, you won't have moles. Well, not really, okay? We'll talk about certain animals that if you get rid of the grubs, you won't have them, but moles isn't one of them. It's maybe getting rid of the earthworms, but you know what? There's no pesticide on the market that's labeled directly for earthworms at this time. Now, there are pesticides that kill earthworms, and there are certain ways you can kill earthworms. But do you want to do that to your soil? Earthworms are great for the soil. Their castings add stuff to the soil. They aerate the soil. So do you really want to get rid of the earthworms is the question. Natural predators? Well, that's tough. The biggest natural predator on a mole is a coyote, okay? So, and there's people say, well, I have a dog or cat. I go, well, there's some dogs that really dig them up. But you know what? After the dog digs up the moles in your yard, the damage that the mole did seems like nothing, Okay, so think again. The other one, which doesn't work in the city limits, is bull snakes. I was on a project where we put bull snakes with transmitters in them in a golf course. We cleaned up the moles like there's no tomorrow. They go down the hole, they search out the mole, they eat the mole, and they don't cause any problem. But again, it's hard to get the bull snakes to stay in the yard, and a lot of people don't want the bull snakes. But it worked out great on our little study. So, natural predators doesn't seem to work that much. There's our coyote. Okay, so let's look at something else to keep them out. Chase them out. Physical, repellents. There's a lot on the market. There's sound repellents, there's olfaction repellents, and there's tactile repellents. Now, how repellents work, and I'll talk about repellents. Repellents work great when there's an alternative. Repellents don't work very well when they have to do it. If you have a choice to feel a little shock or taste something that's terrible, but you have to do that to survive for water or food, you'll do it, okay? However, if you have a choice, okay, if I go this way, I get shocked to get my food, but if I go this way, which doesn't take any more energy, I don't get shocked, yeah, you'll pick that other way. So a lot of repellency tests are done in Y test, which is the completely wrong way to test repellents. And a lot of the tests I do are out in the open. We find out repellents really have a very low rate, but we do have some work. I'll start off with the sound repellent. Again, this is more vibration and tactile because they can't really hear that well underground and it gets muffled. And so they don't like heavy vibration, so you don't have moles on a soccer field during soccer season or on a football field during football season. Either do you have moles under a railroad track or next to a railroad track. But a little bit of vibration they like. So if you put those daisies in your yard that spin, for one, the vibration's only going to go this far. Unless it's really windy, it's going to be a little bit of vibration. And that could actually attract the mole because they think it's an earthworm. Okay? So and then they have these things that you put in. When the batteries are really heavy and it's vibrating the soil and the soil is hard, yeah, they won't get that close to it. Maybe stay a yard away. But that's it. So you have to put one every square yard to keep your moles away. Okay. They do have this thing on the internet that you can hook up a car battery to, and you put these two big things in the yard, and it's supposed to really vibrate the yard. I've never seen a university unbiased test on it. If you talk to the people who use this apparatus, they'll go, no, we don't have any moles in our yard, but we don't really know. That's just, a little bit of anecdotal. The other thing is the smell, since they use olfaction. We know they find the earthworms with smell, and they find their home with smell. We know that the smell of castor oil diverts them. They don't like the smell of castor oil. Okay, it doesn't kill them, but they don't like it. There is a products on the market, and this is just an example. MoleMed is one example. I'm not promoting or denying MoleMed, and there's other brands of that have castor oil. You can buy it like that and spray it on the lawn, and it needs to water in a little bit, but if we have a rain, it usually waters it too far. It needs to be in the soil in the column about, say 10 inches to work. And it does need to be repeated. In our test, we couldn't get the castor oil to work more than maybe a week or two, not the 21 days that a lot of the labels say. However, if you go to my NEB guide or to my website, it'll show you how to make this. All you do is you use 6 ounces of unrefined castor oil. Usually you can buy it like at a Walgreens or place like that. So you get 6 ounces of unrefined castor oil. You put that 6 ounces of unrefined castor oil in a gallon of water, along with a tablespoon of a surfactant, a pure soap. That's to get it to just mix in well, okay? So not a detergent, but a soap, okay, to break down the surface tension. When you do that, 6 ounces and 1 tablespoon in a gallon of water, you get the same product that you're buying. That's your concentrate, and that's what you can buy. You then, in turn, mix this concentrate you made in a gallon, 1 ounce per gallon of spray. In that spray, 1 ounce per gallon, 1 gallon should not be sprayed on more than 300 square feet. then it'll be too thin. So if you have 500 square feet, right, you'll need 2.5 gallons of this mix. So you'll use 2.5 ounces of this concentrate you just made. And it'll be the exact same thing you buy commercially. And it does work. However, you have to spray over the whole lawn. You can't just go around outside and say, oh, this will stop them and they won't come in. No, they'll just go faster through that area and be in the middle of your yard. So if you don't want them in the whole yard, you have to coat the whole yard with this every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the rain. But it does have about a 60% repellency rate done that way, which is really good for repellency. So there is something that would work. Okay, let's move on. Okay, the next thing is trapping. Okay, physical removal. There's several traps. Actually, there's about 8 or 9 different traps for moles on the market. This is a Victor's harpoon mole trap, and we'll just call this the harpoon mole trap. It's the old standard. And then there's several others. There are choker traps, and there's a black hole, which I'll talk about. But all these traps are kind of used the same way. So no matter which one you use, you're going to use it the same way, where you place it. So say this is a yard here. What you want to do is the night before, say right before it gets dark, you're going to walk on all the burrows you found. And then the next morning, you're going to wake up and find out which burrows reappeared. Because if it reappears, that means they used it twice and they'll use it over and over again. If it doesn't reappear, it was probably a feeding tunnel they'll never use again. So why waste your trap on that tunnel? Okay. So you walk over your tunnels, wake up next morning, and then mark those, because you're not going to set the trap to the next that same evening. Okay. So if you use the Victor's, which I like, but there's also the others, you'll just so now the tunnel's back up, because those are the ones they brought back up. You didn't walk it down the second time. You're just going to push it down about the width of your hand, so they can come through real fast. And then at that area, the width of your hand, that's where you can place your trap. Now, these traps work if the mole's coming from either direction. And these need to be set and test fire 2 or 3 times unless it's sand, to make sure it goes fast enough. Okay? And the mole comes through either way. It's either going to choke them, if it's a choker, or it's going to impale them right then and there. Now, for safety reasons, now this goes in the soil, so it's hard for dogs or kids to get to it. But I do this for safety reasons, plus it makes it work better. I put a bucket, just a drywall bucket, I call it, a 5-gallon bucket, you know, you can get at any box store, and I put it upside down over the trap. And make sure it's all dark so the mole doesn't see light, okay? And then I put a rock on it. One, I know where the trap is the next morning when I go to check. And then dogs and cats and animals overnight can accidentally hit it or trip it. So even if it's not the harpoon, even if it's a choker, because these all have come up to the surface a little bit, you just put a bucket over it upside down. So the opening is over the trap. Traps protect it, it's safe, and it makes it dark for the mole. So it enhances that. Now, and then most of these are 100%. If the mole goes in that point, it's going to get him. Okay, and the mole's gone. Okay, death is definitely a deterrent. Okay, for that particular mole. And the other thing is you can leave the mole in there; it would rot and things would take it apart, or you can discard it, or feed it to your dog. I don't know what you want to do with the dead mole, whatever you want. There'd be nothing that would hurt your dog or cat if they eat moles in the mole. The other thing is that when you do this, if you don't get him hit within 2 or 3 days of doing this, move your traps. Usually you should get it in 1 or 2 nights. Okay. On the market, this is one that is a toxicant now. We've moved on, okay, from the repellents, the exclusion, to now toxicant. There's a lot of toxicants on the market, and a lot of them are for moles and gophers, and they say they put that in the label because the companies say this, the public doesn't know the difference between moles and gophers. Well, you'll know now that moles only eat earthworms and insects, gophers only eat vegetation. So if you buy poison peanuts of any kind, the mole's going to spit it out. The other thing is, moles, because they live underground, they're subterranean, they have a buffer in their blood, okay? So it takes enough anticoagulant to kill a mole, which is only this big, that it would take to kill a pound rat. A lot more anticoagulant, just because of the way their blood is and the way it buffers, okay? So you need a special poison. And Bell Labs are the ones who came up with this gummy worm, which has a poison in it that's an anticoagulant that works especially great on moles. And they do sell it as Talparid for the professional, and the exact same thing is sold over the counter as Tomcat for moles. Now, the thing about these, they look like gummy worms, and they're distasteful to mammals and birds. You have to wear the glove for your safety and so your scent is not on these. These smell like an earthworm. Now, the other thing is they're expensive. They're like $1 to $2 a worm. And you need to put one in about every 20 foot in the runs to make sure they eat them, okay? The mole, when it smells it, is going to grab it, and he's only going to chew the patella, which is the reproductive area or the saddle on an earthworm. And that's the only place where there's the poison. So these people want, oh, I'm going to save money. I'm going to cut each one of these in half because they're this big. Half of it's not going to have any poison in it. It's going to be tasteful to the mole. So you can't cut them in half, and they can't get hot. Don't leave them out in a shed in the summer because they'll melt. They'll be no good. You can't. Once you open them, you only have about a couple of days before they dry out. So once you open that package, you don't have a long time. They come in a sealed package, usually 10 per sealed package, and that's it. But they do work. Out of all the toxicants that's been tested by university tests, this is pretty much the only one that's going to really give you a decrease in the population. And there's, with this poison, it's a single feeding poison, and it has extremely low non-target, which means if a cat or dog picks up the carcass after about 4 hours of fed, it should not have any secondary poisoning. It should be broken down, but I would say if it's in the first 4 hours where that worm is still not broken down in the stomach of that mole, it could cause problems for your pets or wildlife. Okay. Well, before I go on, some people say, well, what about cat litter? No. What about cutting your hair and put it in there? No. They'll just make a wig out of it and play around. So there's a lot of mole control wannabes, and when they're tested by, a scientific method, there's very, very little significance to their control. Okay. So go from there. Any questions about moles from anybody?